Combat comes in all different shapes and sizes, from fast and hectic, adrenaline-pumping battles to turn-based combat with room for strategy. But we want to go with something a little in between, inspired mainly by games like Hyperlight Drifter. But unlike Hyperlight Drifter's beautiful and punchy animation, we have... What the hell? So, now that we have the enemies we made in our last video, we need a way to fight them. So to start, let's look at melee combat. There are 4 directions the player can attack in, which we can represent using 4 points for each direction, with a 5th for the player's body. When the player attacks in a direction, we can create a circle using that attack point as the origin. And we can check for any enemies within range of the circle before reducing their health. Multiple enemies can be caught within the circle as the player attacks, causing each enemy to take damage, and if their health reaches 0, they die. If you're wondering what this Syncfar is, that's just for multiplayer. Like the name implies, it synchronizes that variable across the network. So when an enemy takes damage, that enemy's health is shared across each other player's games. Player health is the same, represented by soul fragments. When your health hits 0, you die, temporarily turning into a ghost. This is handled by the player death script. When the player turns into a ghost, their colliders and scripts are temporarily switched off, allowing you to move through walls and avoid enemies. And to differentiate the player ghost from enemy ghosts, the player can have a halo. Over time, your soul fragments regenerate, and once they reach the max, you respawn at home. So if you die in a cave, you could do some last minute exploring before respawning, and by completing challenges and defeating bosses, you could gain a permanent increase in soul fragments, becoming stronger. Next up is ranged combat. Originally we tried having ranged combat the same way we had melee. You can aim in 4 different directions before firing an arrow in that direction. But this made archery feel clunky, and it's difficult aiming at fast moving enemies when you can only shoot in 4 directions. So we scrapped that. Instead, we opted for 360-degree aiming and shooting. Remember those attack points from earlier? We can use the body as the origin point of the bow, and the pivot the bow rotates on. To calculate the bow's rotation, we first need to get the position of the player's mouse, so we know in which direction the bow should be facing. Simple. But things get more complicated when we consider the arrow, and this is where we got stuck. See, the arrow is a separate game object in itself. We can use the body again as a starting point to spawn it in, but when we fire the arrow, we have to ensure that it flies away from the player in the correct direction, and that it's facing the correct direction.
Alright, shoot left.
No.
What? Wait, it's like random in my game.
What the hell?
Wait.
Look. They always go left. No matter where I... Oh. Wait!
Oh, they're going
to you!
To figure it out, we had to use some math. So first, let's look at the formula. Geo refers to the arrow game object, for which we need to calculate the rotation as it's fired. Rotation uses X, Y, and Z variables, but since we're just rotating the bow along a 2D plane, we only need to worry about Z. If we map this on a Cartesian plane, A tan 2 here gets the angle between the cursor's position and the x-axis. We can then use this function to convert this angle to degrees, allowing us to rotate the arrow by the result, so that it points in the direction of the player's cursor when they shoot. And there we have it, a functional bow and arrow system. Now there's probably a much easier way to do this, and both our melee and ranged combat are quite basic and clunky right now. But what's important is that they work, and eventually we'll polish them up in the future. But first, we need to add magic, which we'll be tackling in the next episode. So if that sounds interesting, consider subscribing to stay up to date for more content in the future. Thanks for watching.